Welcome. You are listening to a 2022 Ride on Con podcast. This is Rebecca King from the Ride on Con team. I have the great privilege of speaking with author Jennieke Cohen. We'll be discussing how it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. Jennieke, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Jennieke is a Filipina-American author of young adult historical fiction. Her debut, Dangerous Alliance, was a Junior Library Guild selection and has been translated into multiple languages. Jennieke, can you break down a new non-agented writer's journey from story idea to publication? What was that experience like for you?
Yeah, for me, it was a very long journey, which is why I kind of wanted to talk about this, it being not a sprint and yet a marathon at the same time. So basically, for me, I started after college, I started coming up with ideas for books, and then I started writing, but I didn't quite know what I was doing. I had never really done much creative writing, so I decided to joined some organizations. I joined Romance Writers of America back then, and I joined, eventually I joined SCBWI. So some organizations that like help beginning writers, or that are very good at helping beginning writers and like learn their craft and that sort of thing. And then I also started doing jobs with anything in publishing that I possibly could. So I at one point was an agent's assistant. Well, I started out as an intern. I became her assistant. And then I worked for a publishing company for a while. And all at the same time, I was trying to, just keep writing my book. And then eventually I also decided to get a master's degree in writing. And so that gave me, the real like deadline where I needed to actually finish my novel. So in that respect, it was very helpful because, I think you can just sort of like spin and spin and spin with an idea, or just, revising chapters and not finish a novel, especially when you're beginning and you're not quite sure what you're doing. So my master's degree like gave me the incentive to really finish the book. And then when that was done, when I graduated, I had a book that was finished. I started then submitting to agents, and I thought it was going to be really easy. I thought it was going to be like, I don't know. I didn't think it was, because I had learned so much from RWA and SCBWI and in my master's program, like I didn't think it was going to be a walk in the park, but I also thought I have like a good platform at this point, or I thought I had a good platform at that point. And, I had done a lot of things in the industry. I thought I knew some stuff, and I didn't think it would be super difficult at that point. That was maybe, so let's see, I think I started writing in 2005. And at that point, I guess that was a couple years later. So I didn't have a lot of time under my belt, but I felt like I did. Mm-hmm. And then, it took me years. I was querying that book. I was revising that book, like I sent out a bunch of queries. There was some interest because I had, a couple of referrals through my master's program, but they didn't end up going anywhere. And then, after enough rejections, I decided, okay, well, maybe it needs to be revised. So then I would put it aside. I'd, come back to it. I'd revise it, and then I'd take some time off. I would then come back to it and check, I'd have other people read it. I have critique partners read it. And it was just like a constant struggle of querying and getting requests sometimes, and then I would go to conferences, writers' conferences, and try and pitch agents there, and you get some like interest, of course, but I mean, hopefully you do. I did. But then, again, it didn't end up getting beyond like full requests. No one would give me feedback as far as like the agents or the editors I was submitting to. So then, I would also try and do critique. Like in SCBWI has a thing where you can submit for critiques from an editor or agent or someone in the industry. And those would be helpful, but they're very short. They're like 10 pages, at least they were then. And so, yeah, it's like this constant struggle. And then, you start on other projects. And in my case, I would always want to come back to my first book and try and get that one published. It was just the one that I was really excited about and that I wanted to be out there in some form or other. And so, years went by. I had done many revisions and started other books. And then I finally had gotten to the point in about, I think it was 2016, I had gotten to the point where I was like, this book, I'll do one more round with querying it. And if it goes nowhere, I will self-publish it, because why not?
Right.
And at that point, I also found out about Pitch Wars, which was this, it's a contest that is now gone, unfortunately, but it basically would hook you up with a mentor in the industry who would help you revise your whole novel. And so, long story short, I ended up getting into Pitch Wars, and then we revised my novel, my mentor and I did. And I mean, obviously I did all the work, but she was able to help me like figure out what I was missing and what I didn't see at that anymore, because it had been so many years that I was working on this book. And with her help, I was able to revise it and get it to a point where, she thought people in the industry would go for it. And then after Pitch Wars, I queried for a little while, a few months, I believe, maybe less than 6 months, maybe like 4 months, 3 months. And then I ended up with getting an agent finally, after so many years of trying.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really, it can be a very, very long journey. And then that book, once I got my agent, it took another, it took her maybe another few months, 5 months at the most, to get it to an editor who liked it. And then eventually we got an offer of publication. So that was amazing after so many years. Yeah. But then it was another couple of years before it was published. So, all told, it was like 11 years from when I, or if not more, from when I started to when it actually got out on the market. So yeah, I think everyone's journey is totally different, obviously, but I do know many people who've had it, whose journey was as long as mine or longer. I think when I was first starting out, I had an author tell me about her journey and how long it took her. It took her 11 years. And I remember thinking, gosh, I hope that's not going to be me. And it was. So, but there are many people for whom it does not take that long. So, yeah.
Was it worth it?
I think it was. Yeah. It was amazing to see my book out on bookshelves after so long.
I bet. So what parts of the journey were harder to get through? Which ones were the harder ones to sit?
It feels like everything is hard almost, which it's just not like, that motivational. However, I think, so the querying is super hard because you're just kind of, especially before you get any real feedback, I think that's a really tough part of the journey. Because you just feel like you're, toiling away, and you don't know what's hitting and what isn't. So I think that's really tough. But then once you do get some feedback, and once you start getting some requests, that can be tough as well, because, you feel like you're getting somewhere, and then it stalls, or you're not getting as far as you hope. So which is why I think like mentorship programs are really great, because that's, if you can get someone in the industry who's willing to help you with your manuscript, like I think it's extremely valuable, obviously. But then also once you're agented, I think the waiting game for getting that editor who will buy your book, like that's really tough too. I remember I had a long wait we had interest, and then we were waiting for months. It felt like it was months, but it felt like a long time before they actually said they would buy the book. And I remember that felt like that was so agonizing. It felt
Yeah.
like you're almost there and yet you don't know what's going to happen. So yeah, there's a lot of parts that are tough to get through, I think.
I feel like some parts of the journey, like it's like there are invisible hurdles that
Mm,
you're running against, and you knock into them. Like you think, okay, I'm going, I'm going, I'm going, and then bam, you're on the ground again. And you've got
yes.
to kind of pick yourself up and figure out how to move forward again. And do I want to keep running this race and that sort of thing. So yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
interesting that a lot of people sort of have those types of experiences. And to your point, it seems like people start to understand it a little better when they kind of build out their community enough to have a coach or someone else
Right.
who has been through it. So it shines some light on some of that.
I think
Uh,
that's true. Yeah. I think the more people you know who have been through this
yeah.
stuff, it can it's helpful because you know you may have a better idea of what's coming, but on the other hand, you're then clued into how difficult it really is, I guess.
Yeah. And then it can be achieved. You just keep getting
Yeah.
that reminder, hopefully, if you surround yourself with people who have done it. Um, so okay, so before you were published, how did you manage that expectation setting that we have to do with family and friends where they say, "Oh, weren't you writing a book? How's that book?"
Gosh, yes. I had that for years and years. And not they don't even mean it in a, negative way. I think in most
Right.
cases, like they're just curious, like, what are you doing? What's happening? What are you doing? Why does it take so long? Um, so the way I managed that was basically trying to explain to them in detail how it worked, um, how hard it is. But it's you got to kind of know your audience. Like some people don't really care. Sometimes they're just asking to ask, and then sometimes they actually are interested to find out how difficult it is and how long it takes. Um, but yeah, it was mostly like trying to explain it,
Yeah.
explaining it over and over again. Um, yeah, it's tough. I don't think there's any like great strategy there. I think it's just sort of trying to get them to understand. But
Yeah.
you
And
know,
something that maybe you don't understand unless you're doing it and living it and
I think that's true.
you feel it. It's such a different industry. So now when you
Yeah.
commit to a new book, how long do you expect to spend on it? And what activities do you know you're going to be required to commit to?
Yeah. Well, so basically it's for me it has depended. This last book, my second book, it took um well, I think you need to kind of know you're committing to this thing for at least a few years. That's sort of the minimum because even after, let's say you get it, your publisher is able to publish it in a year, which would be really fast, which would be quite fast. You then are going to have at least a few months after, at three, like I would say you need to plan to have around 6 months afterwards where you're like promoting it, trying to get it out there as much as you possibly can. Um, and then, that's not even including just the writing time. When you build that in, that's, at least that depends person to person, of course. But um, I plan for at least like this is a project that's going to take me years. I have to think about that and try not to see it as a big Everest because I tend to do that. And um, yeah, what activities are required of you? Basically, like you're expected to promote, you're expected to write the book, you're expected to go through edits, change things that you're publishing, how your editor wants you to change or thinks would be beneficial changes. And you don't have to change everything, but you do have to take on their feedback, of course. um, that and then like yeah, committing to a new book also kind of entails all the prep work for any book. Depending on what your process is, if it's writing a detailed outline, if it's just knowing your characters and then hoping you can get the plot going, if you're not a plotter, then yeah, it's, all the prep work, all the writing, and then all the revising, and then all the stuff that the publisher makes you go through, like looking at the cover and hopefully coming up with some kind of marketing plan for you. And if they're not coming up for marketing with the marketing plan for you, then you need to kind of deal with that yourself. So that's something also that you got to consider.
Wow. So now, are there parts that you still feel like, okay, this drags, this is hard, like it's hard to suffer through this?
Yes.
Or is it easier now that you're published?
No, I think there's always hard parts, no matter where you are on this journey. I think for me, one of the hardest parts is writing the book. The revisions are like a little more fun for me. I'm not quite sure why. Maybe because it feels like the majority of the work is out of the way. I tend to get bogged down in the writing, and then I have to come up with strategies for myself, like writing by hand or dictating it into some kind of software that will then transcribe it for me. I have to come up with all kinds of tricks to get myself to actually write. It's the other stuff that I enjoy more, which is kind of.
Are you a pantser then?
No, not really. I'm mostly a plotter. I feel like I don't do huge detailed outlines, but I do have to know like the story structure, where it's going in general, where it's going. Like I don't need to know details, but I need to know I have a direction, basically.
Yeah. So you do the heavy lifting in the front. That's why it's yeah.
Yeah.
So can you speak a bit? And I feel like a fair number of folks are starting to talk about this more. But can you talk about the realities of compensation for writers and agents, and tell us your thoughts on balancing things like having to keep a traditional career while you're still trying to pursue publishing?
Yeah. So compensation is, an issue that is kind of fraught with issues, I suppose, but just talk, because everyone gets paid a different amount. So, and, there's a lot of different factors that are kind of hidden to the author. So if you have an agent, hopefully they're going to be advocating for the very best deal for you when they're talking to the publisher. But it's always tough because obviously writers and agents always want more money, and the publishing houses have created some kind of I don't know, almost like a balance sheet. I don't think they call it that, but like they have figured out the costs of what your book will cost them. And so they will be offering you in advance according to that sort of balance sheet. And, of course it depends publisher to publisher, some publisher, the big five, or it's not even big five anymore, right? It's the bigger publishers pay, ostensibly more than the medium and small publishers, and you kind of have to know that going in, you, the author, I mean, and because your agent should know that stuff. But really, I think the most important part of that whole kind of conversation is like you, the writer, the author, need to go through that contract that they offer you in detail. And like, I know not everyone is legally minded, and I certainly am not very legally minded, but I think it's extremely important to know what those clauses in your contract mean, because sometimes those can be more problematic than the money you're getting. And again, like if you have a good agent, they should know, the realities of like what goes into that contract. They're hopefully you're going to have a good boilerplate with that particular publisher, meaning, certain agents have a negotiated contract that they have already done with specific publishers. And therefore, like you would then get the terms that their other authors have gotten at that publisher. So but that stuff's all like the little stuff's all kind of up for negotiation. And of course the advance is up for negotiation too. But yeah, so I would always say like the realities of the contract are extremely important. And then as far as like living off your writing, the money you get for your advances, like I think it really depends on what you get. I would not say if you have a full-time job that you should quit it as soon as you get a writing contract, because it's not a salary. I mean, quite obviously, it is simply an amount of money you are paid up front for this book, and like you have to be the one to figure out how to dole that out in your own. Well, first of all, you're not going to get it all in one chunk. Most likely, you're going to get it in at least a couple chunks, maybe 3. And I've heard in some cases like they're pushing it to like 4, 5, 6 chunks, which is really interesting. But and that's something that's happened during the pandemic, I guess. So my point is, you can't necessarily look at the money that you get from a writing contract as something you can live off of, unless you are you've gotten some amazing deal. But yeah, so I would say balancing the traditional career, if you have one, keep it. And until you really are financially, feel like you're financially secure, and that, you're constantly churning out novels and you're constantly getting contracts and with money that is good enough for you to live on. But otherwise, I would say you just kind of have to like look at that money as, you're getting compensated for something amazing you wrote, which is amazing. But
Right.
but yeah, as far as like living off of it, it's tough.
Yeah. Tough to plan around, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So how about accountability? How do you decide how much you're going to get done and when to get it done?
Yeah, that's so tough. I think everyone approaches this differently. I am very bad at this. But yeah, okay. So I will, if I'm in the middle of writing a book or if I have a contract, I will figure out what I need to get done by a certain, by the deadline, basically. And my thing is sort of like I write a scene a day, or when I'm writing. But other than that, like when I don't have a contract or I'm not like constantly feeling the need to get something done, I will just kind of write when I can and when I feel like it's inspiring. But yeah, when I am on deadline, I would say you do kind of have to plan it out, figure out like how much time you're given, and then figure out accordingly how many words you have to write in a day, or how many scenes you have to write in a day, how much time you're going to need to do that. And, if you're up against a tough deadline, I think it's good to be honest with your agent and your editor. And if you're having trouble, like, definitely let them know earlier rather than later. But as far as like, yeah, accountability for yourself, I think it's like super personal. And I think, and it also depends on, it depends on your life, it depends on your lifestyle, it depends on how many books you are trying to get finished at a time, or in a year.
How do you decide that for yourself?
Yeah, I think that it's tough. Like I don't know. I think the pandemic kind of messed up whatever my process was going to be. So I don't do I don't have a plan of like how many I'm going to write in a year or how many I'm going to write. Because it's just like, I think for me, inspiration became a real sort of hiccup during the pandemic, and, still is to some extent. So, you have to give yourself some grace as well. Like it's good to churn out books, but then on the other hand, like if they're not of the quality that you would like them to be, I'm not sure I'm not sure if there's a huge point to that just for the sake of churning out books.
Yeah.
But that's me personally. So.
Yeah. Well, that makes a whole lot of sense. That's got your name on it. And you're investing a lot of time and effort into it.
Yeah. I mean, you are. I mean, like I
idea.
said, it's years out of your life, potentially.
Yeah.
So for me, I have to feel like I'm doing something I really want to be writing.
Yeah. So, what role has writing community played in your journey? You spoke a little bit about having different positions within the industry, and that helped to influence your early time. And then you spoke a little bit about having the mentorship.
Yeah.
So,
Go ahead.
no, yeah, but just elaborating on that and any other type of community that you still maintain, how does that help or hurt or impact your journey?
Okay. Yeah. I think the jobs that I started out doing before my master's program, they were very helpful. They helped me figure out a lot about what the industry was all about, um, that I certainly didn't know before. And then my mentorship in Pitch Wars was really, really impactful. I became really good friends with my mentor, and we became critique partners, and we're constantly like helping each other with our writing, and just we became like friends in real life. So that was nice. And it just sort of like, it was, well, for one thing, it was amazing to know somebody who knew all the ins and outs of not just publishing, but the the author side of publishing, right? And so that was really helpful. So I think, yeah, if you can get a mentor, I think that's great, because you can ask them questions, assuming they have the time. They will help you and like let you know the answers to these questions that you couldn't get before. But also, when I was in Pitch Wars, we had a Pitch Wars community as well, where we all kind of supported each other and gave each other information about which agents were taking what, and how long they were taking to get back to people. That was really helpful. So yeah, if you can get some kind of writing community, whether online or in person, nowadays, like I think it's well, we're coming back to in-person stuff, so maybe, but yeah, in general, for me, the online stuff was helpful, because I knew people in real life who were writers, and they were helpful too, but they were writing in different genres. So I guess when I met people who were writing, they were all like, when in Pitch Wars, we were all sort of at the same point in our journeys, right? So we were all trying to get agents at that point, and we were all going through the whole process of revising our novels to a high bar. And so, yeah, I feel like it's important to meet people, or try to meet people who are at the same quote unquote level with you, just because, it's easier to support each other at that point. And then, once you get agented, hopefully you meet other people who are agented, and then you're all waiting to get published, hopefully get a publishing deal. And then when you become, an author, then you meet other authors, and you get to talk about the stuff like contracts, fun stuff like that. And, so I think it's played a big part. And I think at the beginning, I was trying to meet writers through, like I said, RWA, SCBWI, and I would meet some people, but for some reason, for me, the online community ended up working out better, or people just seem more, I don't know. I wonder if the in-person stuff was like more about socializing / networking than actually dealing with the like the nitty gritty stuff of querying and writing and stuff. So for me, the online community worked well. But I totally encourage anybody to try both avenues, because it's great to know people in person who are going through that stuff. It's just can be hard depending on where you live, and finding those people. That's all.
Yeah. So are there any like online groups that you'd recommend, or is it more just through your experiences online?
So, well, Pitch Wars is over now, unfortunately, but there's still other mentorship programs out there. There's Author Mentor Match, which I've done in the past, which is run by Alexa Dunn, who's a friend of mine, and they put together a very nice community as well. And then let's see, I know there's all kinds of like Facebook groups as well. None that I can pinpoint off the top of my head, but yeah, I feel like there's so many. It's just a matter of figuring out which ones work for you. Then I do think, depending on your finances, if you can join one of those professional organizations, that's super helpful.
Yeah. So now how about motivation? What do you do to get yourself to come back to the page, even though things are so slow and so uncertain?
Well, this is a tough one. I think for me, I go back, I watch a lot of movies from like classic movies, stuff that is not commonly seen anymore. I will try and like delve into some like obscure stuff. I will delve into that stuff, and then I will also delve into historical time periods, because I've written 2 historicals, and and I love history in general. So I will occasionally delve into odd rabbit holes of history. And that can motivate me too. And then also reading other people's books, either, reading just in general, like whatever catches your eye or whatever you are interested in. I think that is sort of like the big thing that helps me keep going. Coming back to the writing, and just in general, keeping yourself motivated. I feel like it's such a tough one, and especially I feel like it's become even tougher with the pandemic. So I think anything you can do that brings you some joy, that might be motivating. And yeah, getting outside for a walk,
Yeah.
doing other things. And for me also, now that it's a little safer, like going out and meeting up with old friends again who are writers, and talking about writing with your friends, that can be motivating. Yeah, that's what I find works.
So I think it's especially interesting because your genre is historical. So is that the piece you first fell in love with, or was it the writing stories and then you decided that historical was your niche?
Yeah, good question. I think I've always told stories. I never wrote them down. I even as a kid, I would make up stuff and tell my family or my friends, and we play little, like all kids do. You play make believe games and stuff. But so I feel like I always kind of did tell stories,
Mhm.
and but I just wasn't that interested in writing them down. I think I
Yeah.
got really burnt out in school with writing non-creative stuff, for
Yeah.
essays, etc. And so that's just like, for me, it was falling in love with the writing was maybe the secondary thing. I think, yeah, for me, it's the storytelling stuff. And then historical stuff. I have always loved history. I think I just tried to write, like my first novel, Dangerous Alliance. I think I just tried to write a historical because I loved reading historicals, and
Yeah.
so it wasn't necessarily that I was like, this is me and I have to write a historical for the rest of my life. It was just sort of like, I like this stuff. Why don't I try? So yeah.
That's great. I've always shied away from trying historicals because it feels like there's the extra step of having to learn history.
Sure.
I'm like, I don't think I'm that smart. Like, it's like science fiction. Like, I can never write science fiction because I don't know about science, but I love reading historical novels. Like, I am so grateful to you and your people because I love reading them. But yeah, it just seems like you go the extra mile. 'Cause you have
Well,
to
yeah,
look.
I mean, it's another big step, obviously, doing some research. I think, but yeah, there's some leeway depending on the type of historical book you're doing. I think
Yeah.
my second book is more of an alternate historical, because for one reason, I mean, for a number of reasons, but one reason was that I wasn't able to do the research I wanted to do because of the pandemic, and I wasn't able to travel to England and do deep dives into things that I would have done otherwise. So yeah, sometimes you just have to make things work. But I wouldn't recommend, totally veering off history just because you feel like it by any means.
I do. I'm just like, nope, I'm not going there. Unless I get to go to England. If I get to go to England, I'll try.
Yeah. But also, like, if you have legitimate reasons for veering off of history in whatever you're writing, I think as long as you make that clear to the reader why you veered off, then I think it's okay. Because this is fiction, or at least what we're talking about is fiction. So
Okay, that feels fair to me. All right. So unfortunately, that is all the time that we have today. But how can we find you and your books?
Yeah, I have a website, JenniekesCohen.com, and I am also on Instagram and Twitter. Jennieke_Cohen is my handle.
And to all of you listening at Right on Con 2022, thank you so much for joining us. If you'd like to take part in the discussion, we'd love for you to do so in the comments of this podcast page. Enjoy the rest of the conference and happy writing.